Most people do not have a money problem first. They have a machine problem. You can earn a decent income and still stay trapped. You can get raises, bonuses, even a better title, and still feel pressure in your chest every time life moves 1 inch off script. That is not because the world is uniquely unfair to you. It is because your cash flow is moving through the wrong machine. I have watched people spend 20 years trying to solve a structural problem with emotional effort. They work harder. They promise themselves they will be more disciplined next month. They look for motivation. They blame a coffee habit. They try a budgeting app for 3 weeks. None of that repairs the machine. A leaking engine does not become reliable because the driver is more sincere. If I wanted to build wealth from ordinary income, I would begin with something painfully simple. Every dollar that enters your life must be forced through 3 chambers. 1 chamber is for living, 1 chamber is for shock absorption, 1 chamber is for ownership. If you do not separate those chambers, your life becomes one muddy pool. Rent fights with investing, emergencies fight with groceries, boredom fights with reason. Every surprise turns into debt. Every pay raise disappears into lifestyle inflation. Every goal gets pushed into a later year that never arrives. That is the real poverty of modern life. It is not always low income. It is often bad routing. I would rather see you earn $70,000 through a clean machine than $120,000 through a chaotic one. A clean machine creates surplus. A chaotic machine creates theater. The outside looks successful. The inside runs hot, fragile, and over-leveraged. So let me tell you how I would route the money. I would cap my lifestyle at 75% of income. I would force 10% into a cushion that exists to absorb violence. Then I would direct at least 15% into ownership, so the machine starts working for me while I sleep. That sounds small. It is not small. It is a complete reversal of how most people live. Most people let spending decide first, panic save second, and maybe invest later if the month is kind. That is backward. That is how employees stay employees forever. That is how a person with talent becomes a permanent feeder system for landlords, lenders, subscriptions, and impulse merchants. You need a harder rule because your emotions are soft around money. Mine are too. Everyone's are. Money leaks through comfort. Status, convenience, guilt, celebration, fatigue, fear, and social imitation. If you do not impose architecture, appetite will do the routing for you. The first chamber is the living chamber. 75% is the ceiling. Notice what I said, the ceiling, not the target. If you can live on 65%, even better. If you can live on 60, better still. But I like a ceiling because it forces honesty. It tells you there is a maximum amount of your own labor you are allowed to consume. It reminds you that income is not permission. Income is raw material. Most people treat income like a reward. I treat it like inventory. That one mental shift changes everything. The moment you stop saying, I made this so I can spend it, and start saying, this is incoming fuel, where should I route it? Your life gets quieter. You stop negotiating with every temptation. The machine has already made the decision. The 75% chamber does not mean you must live like a monk. It means you stop pretending that every desire deserves permanent budget space. You are allowed to buy things you genuinely value. I am not in the business of making a sensible person feel guilty about a $5 pleasure that truly improves the day. If a small purchase brings disproportionate utility, more energy, better work, more calm, more enjoyment with almost no structural damage, that is not the enemy. The enemy is not the little expense that delivers real value. The enemy is the large, recurring identity-driven expense that quietly colonizes your entire future. That is where amateurs get confused. They fight over coffee and ignore the car payment. They skip small pleasures and then sign a large financing agreement because it feels adult. They clip coupons and then move into a bigger apartment because they wanted the image of progress that is like squeezing air out of a balloon while leaving the knife in the side. The rich people, I know, the real ones, are not usually dramatic about money. They are not reckless just because they can afford to be. In many cases, they are almost embarrassingly precise. They will ask what the special is. They will compare options. They will split costs carefully, not because they are desperate, because they are trained. They do not like paying an unnecessary markup for ego. That is one of the most misunderstood traits in wealth. Frugality at the point of low-value consumption is not scarcity. It is self-respect. It is refusing to hand capital to noise. You should study your own spending with that lens. Not is this cheap. Not can I afford it this month. Ask a harder question. Is this purchase buying durable value, or am I renting a feeling? That question will save you more than 1,000 productivity tips. A new car is the classic example. People talk about it as though it is transportation. Often it is not. Often it is mood regulation with leather seats. The first few weeks feel like a promotion. Then adaptation arrives. Your nervous system normalizes the object, the payment remains, the insurance remains, the depreciation remains, the opportunity cost remains. The machine gets heavier while the emotional return collapses. Televisions, furniture upgrades, oversized weddings, aspirational neighborhoods, premium subscriptions, decorative debt. All of it follows the same pattern. Big expenses are not dangerous because they are evil. They are dangerous because they hard code a permanent demand into the machine. Once you hard code that demand, the rest of your life must serve it. That is when salary stops being income and becomes hostage money. People tell me they want freedom, but then they engineer monthly obligations that require permanent obedience. They say they want choice, but they build a cost structure that eliminates choice. They say they want time. But every upgrade steals future time because now they need the income stream that supports the upgrade. That is why I begin with the 75% ceiling. It is not a budgeting trick. It is refusal power. The lower your fixed burn, the more intelligent your decisions become. You can leave a bad job faster. You can ignore bad deals. You can take a temporary step back without panic. You can think instead of flinch. A low burn rate is not just a financial metric. It is a cognitive advantage. The person spending 95% of income is not only financially fragile, that person is mentally taxed. Every surprise becomes a threat. Every boss becomes more powerful. Every market downturn feels personal. A high burn life does not just trap your money. It traps your judgment. Now, let me move to the second chamber, because this is where adulthood becomes real. 10% goes into what I would call the shock absorber. Most people do not have a financial life. They have a financial fantasy. It works only if nothing goes wrong. No car problem, no job interruption, no medical bill, no family emergency, no flight home, no broken appliance, no bad month, no sudden move, no ugly surprise of any kind. That is not a plan. That is a prayer. The shock absorber exists because life does not ask your permission before sending impact. If you do not build a buffer in advance, the impact travels directly into debt, shame, panic, and expensive decisions. I have seen one ordinary emergency reorder an entire decade of someone's life. A person without a cash buffer does not just pay the repair cost. They pay late fees, interest, stress, missed work, bad sleep, damaged focus, and the downstream cost of grabbing the first ugly solution available. That is what I mean when I say fragility compounds. A shock absorber interrupts that chain reaction. I do not want that money mixed with spending money. I do not want it disguised as checking account excess. I do not want it sitting where boredom can access it. I want it segregated with a purpose so clear that you almost feel a moral resistance to touching it. This fund is not for vacations, not for retail therapy, not for curiosity, not for proving that you can still enjoy life. It is for when the machine takes a hit and you refuse to let one hit destroy the whole structure. How large should it be? I like starting with roughly 5 months of essential expenses. Not 5 months of fantasy spending, 5 months of what keeps the roof, food, transport, insurance, utilities, and basic obligations alive. If your essential monthly burn is $2,000, then I want to see around $10,000 in that chamber. If your essential burn is $4,000, I want $20,000. The number is less important than the logic. You are buying time, and time is the most underpriced asset in personal finance. When you have cash runway, you stop acting like prey. That is why I prefer to see the shock absorber in a high yield savings vehicle rather than a lazy near zero account that pays you almost nothing. I do not ask the shock absorber to become an aggressive asset. That is not its job. Its job is liquidity with dignity. It should be accessible, visible, protected, and mildly productive. Not asleep, not speculative. Once that chamber is full, something important happens. You stop worshiping cash accumulation for its own sake. A lot of people never make that turn. They save and save and save, but they do not graduate from defense to deployment. They confuse stored money with intelligent money. Cash has a role, but beyond a point, excess idle cash becomes its own form of fear. You are not here to become the caretaker of an ever-growing pile of timid dollars. You are here to build a system where cash protects you, then ownership advances you. That brings me to the third chamber. And this is where wealth actually begins. At least 15% of every dollar should be routed into ownership. Not someday, not after the kitchen renovation, not after the holidays, not after things calm down. Things do not calm down. Life manufactures new reasons to delay ownership every year. If you wait for emotional clarity before you start investing, you will remain a spectator. The rich do not merely work for money. They own things that continue working after their labor stops for the day. That is the whole game. School trains you to become more valuable in the labor market. Fine. There is nothing wrong with competence. I admire competence. But labor income alone is a treadmill. You can make a great living and still remain dependent on continuous output. Ownership changes the equation. Ownership means your capital has a shift after yours ends. That is why the third chamber is not optional. It is not the nice-to-have chamber. It is the escape chamber. People ask me what real wealth feels like. It does not feel like luxury first. It feels like reduced dependence. It feels like options. It feels like not having to say yes quite so fast. It feels like being harder to coerce. Ownership buys that. Now, if I were starting from ordinary income, I would use tax-advantaged containers before I made things complicated. A Roth IRA is one such container. The beauty is not that it sounds sophisticated. The beauty is that future growth can be sheltered from taxes under the rules that govern it. That is powerful because compounding is already a small miracle. Taxes are one of the few forces that can quietly interrupt that miracle. A good container protects the engine. A 401k, especially with an employer match, is another obvious route. If an employer is willing to add money because you participated, I would take that seriously. Refusing an efficient match is like walking past a return you already earned in the contract and calling it independence. It is not independence. It is negligence. You should understand the moral difference between saving and owning. Saving preserves yesterday's work, owning multiplies it. Both matter, but they are not the same. Saving without ownership is maintenance. Ownership is expansion. If you never make that transition, you remain in a life where your future must be purchased again and again with fresh labor. That is exhausting. That is why so many high earners remain psychologically poor. They have income, but they do not have accumulation machinery. The mechanics themselves are not difficult. Open the proper accounts, fund them consistently, actually allocate the money into investments rather than letting it sit as idle cash, and then keep it painfully simple. Simplicity is underrated because people like the performance of intelligence. They want to feel sophisticated. They want their money story to sound clever at dinner. That is how they drift into unnecessary complexity. Fashionable products, undisciplined stock picking, and endless tinkering. For most people, a broad, low-cost index fund is enough. That is not because ambition is bad, it is because ego is expensive. I have spent my life studying businesses, but I have never believed the average person needs a circus of strategies to build wealth. What they need is consistency, diversification, low friction, and time. Time does most of the heavy lifting if you stop interrupting it. If you put $100 a month into productive assets for decades, the raw contributions will be smaller than the final result by an absurd margin. That is the lesson people resist because it insults their desire for speed. Compounding is not exciting at first. It is offensive to impatient people. It asks you to look ordinary for a long time so you can become extraordinary later. Most people cannot tolerate that trade. They want evidence too early. They want lifestyle signals. They want proof for other people. They want to consume the identity of future wealth before the balance sheet has earned it. That is how the machine fails. Not through one dramatic mistake, but through repeated theft by impatience. Let me make this even clearer. The 75% ceiling trains restraint. The 10% shock absorber trains stability. The 15% ownership chamber trains expansion, restraint, stability, expansion. That is not a budget. That is a capital sequence. If the order is wrong, your life feels wrong. If you invest aggressively without a shock absorber, one emergency can force liquidation or debt. If you save but never invest, you remain safe and stagnant. If you spend first and hope discipline appears later, appetite eats structure. The order matters because your nervous system matters. Good financial architecture is not only about math, it is about behavior under pressure. I want a system you can follow when you are tired, distracted, emotional, busy, underpaid, or temporarily discouraged. A good system survives imperfect moods. That is why percentage rules matter more than heroic intentions. Percentages scale with you. If you earn more, the machine grows. If you earn less, the machine still holds its shape. The proportions protect the logic. A person earning $40,000 can still build a sound machine. A person earning $400,000 can still ruin one. Income changes the size of the river. It does not automatically fix the route. And let me say something unpopular. Many people do not need a raise first. They need an audit of the machine they already have. I have seen households with strong income and no operating intelligence. They are dressed well, financed heavily, subscribed broadly, vacationing frequently, stressed constantly, and saving almost nothing. Every visible sign says success. Every invisible sign says dependence. I have also seen people with modest income and real discipline. No performance, no unnecessary overhead, strong emergency reserves, steady investing, modest housing, controlled transportation costs, a clear gap between earnings and lifestyle. Those people often become rich slowly while the flashy household remains strangely fragile. That is because wealth is not the same as spending capacity. Wealth is retained control. If I took away your next 6 paychecks, the truth would appear instantly. The person with retained control can absorb, pivot, wait, and choose. The person without it will discover that high consumption was never wealth. It was rented status. This is where psychology enters the machine. You do not overspend only because things are attractive. You overspend because spending offers emotional anesthesia. It can soothe inadequacy, reward endurance, express identity, reduce boredom, create belonging, and imitate people you admire. That is why financial advice that stays purely numerical is weak. The machine is mechanical, but the sabotage is psychological. You must become harder to seduce. You must learn to spot the difference between a life-enhancing expense and a self-deceiving one. The first one buys durable utility. The second one buys emotional theater and sends the invoice to your future. Ask yourself what category most of your major purchases really belong to. Ask yourself why I deserve it becomes most convincing right after stress. Ask yourself why convenience has become one of the most expensive addictions in modern life. Ask yourself why people who talk most loudly about freedom often accept the heaviest recurring costs. Ask yourself why a higher salary so often produces no permanent peace. The answer is almost always the same. The machine improved in size but not in design. That is why I do not worship high income. I respect well-routed income. Now let me address the common excuse. People say, I cannot invest 15% right now because everything is expensive. Maybe in some cases that is true for a season. But many people say that before they have honestly attacked the 75% ceiling. They want permission to skip ownership while leaving the most expensive habits untouched. They want the future to absorb what the present refuses to surrender. I would rather see you start with a painfully small ownership rate and preserve the habit than wait for the mythical year when life becomes easy. Easy never arrives on schedule. Habits, however, accumulate. A person investing a modest amount with discipline often beats a person with grand intentions and no system. The market rewards time in the vehicle more than emotional enthusiasm outside it. And when income rises, do not let the machine rot from success. This is one of the great dangers. A little progress arrives, and immediately the standard of living expands to meet it. Better apartment, better car, better dining, better clothes, better vacations, better assumptions about what is now normal. Suddenly the person who got a raise feels the same pressure at a higher altitude. That is not progress. That is a more decorative cage. The machine only improves when some share of every increase is captured and routed into cushion or ownership instead of being automatically consumed. The wealthy often look conservative, not because they lack imagination, but because they understand how dangerous fixed obligations are. They know that every permanent upgrade competes with future freedom. I want you to feel this clearly. Every dollar you consume is gone once. Every dollar you hold in the shock absorber protects you more than once. Every dollar you place in productive ownership can serve you again and again. That is the hierarchy. Consumption can be fine. Protection is better. Ownership is best. But only if the order is maintained. I would even go further and say this. The real point of the machine is not retirement in the abstract. The real point is to reduce your dependence on stupidity. Yours and everyone else. As a cash buffer protects you from bad timing. A disciplined lifestyle protects you from social pressure. Broad ownership protects you from relying on one employer, one boss, one paycheck, one mood, one quarter, one election, one lucky break. When you combine those protections, you start to build a low cortisol life. You are not constantly improvising. You are not afraid of every envelope, every phone call, every downturn, every repair. You start moving from reaction to design. That is what people really want when they say they want more money. They think they want luxury. Often what they actually want is relief. Relief comes from structure. Freedom comes from structure. Dignity comes from structure. Not glamorous structure, not viral structure, not cocktail, party structure. Just the kind that survives real life. I have no interest in impressing you with complexity. Complexity is a tax on weak discipline. If a simple machine does the job, I will choose the simple machine every time. Cap lifestyle, build shock absorber, buy ownership, repeat. Do that long enough and a remarkable thing happens. Work becomes less desperate. Decisions become less emotional. Unexpected costs become less catastrophic. Market volatility becomes less theatrical. You begin to think in years instead of weekends. That is when capital starts changing your personality in a good way. You become calmer because you are less exposed. You become more selective because you are less cornered. You become more rational because you are less hungry. Most bad financial decisions are not made by stupid people. They are made by squeezed people. Squeeze distorts judgment. The machine I am describing is designed to remove squeeze. Now I want to tell you the harshest part. No one is coming to install this for you. Not your employer, not your school, not your bank, not your favorite app, not the culture that profits from your confusion. The modern economy is perfectly happy to let you remain a high-earning consumer with no cushion, no ownership, and no refusal power. In fact, many industries depend on that version of you. The anxious borrower, the eager upgrader, the underinvested worker, the person who mistakes access for wealth. If you do not deliberately route your money, the world will route it for you, and the world routes it toward extraction. That is why this is not just a finance lesson. It is an independence test. You can live as a pass-through device where income enters and disappears into obligations, convenience, and image. Or you can build a machine that steadily converts labor into security, and security into ownership, and ownership into freedom. Those are different lives, even if they begin on the same salary. So here is the personal test. Look at your last 12 months and tell yourself the truth. Did your money move through a machine, or did it move through your moods? Did your income buy structure, or did it buy noise? Do you have a real shock absorber, or just hope dressed as optimism? Are you building ownership every month, or are you waiting for the future to be kinder than the present, when the next disruption comes? Will you be forced to panic, or will you have room to think? That is the door in front of you. On one side is the old life, where every dollar arrives without a job, your expenses vote before your values do, and your future gets whatever is left after appetite is finished. On the other side is a quieter, harder, stronger life where every dollar enters a machine. Your lifestyle stays under command. Your buffer absorbs shocks, and your ownership grows in the background until dependence starts to crack. You do not need brilliance to walk through that door. You need honesty, you need a ceiling, you need a shock absorber, you need an ownership engine, and you need to decide whether your income will continue to be consumed by the machine outside you or finally be routed into the machine that belongs to you.